Welcome to Punch Keys Podcast. I'm Poppy Minix, your co-host, bringing you blunt talk for the fiction novelist.
And I'm Cass Kay, your other writerly co-host. If you love to ramble about writing and need a tribe, you found us.
Are you ready? We're uncorking now. Let's talk about punching those keys.
It is Punch Keys time. Season 2, the season of Cass not singing in intros.
Oh, you failed already! Episode 2 and it's like, bomb! Oh! Well, that's okay.
That's right.
I like your singing, so it's cool.
So, that's good, because you're stuck with me.
We're
true. Back for season 2.
Yes, we are.
Came in with super fun writerly lies, and we're not going to call you guys liars today. Don't worry.
No.
But we're going to talk about words. All the words. Words.
Because if you're a writer, God, do you love words?
I actually, when you pitched this topic, I was kind of like,
Words?
Words?
Why?
Like, I don't even know how I'm going to find a catchy title for this. I'm going to find something that gets someone's attention.
Well,
but when we start talking about it and researching, there's some really cool stuff to talk about because words make stories. So choosing those words is everything, and it should be something we think about. It shouldn't be a casual thing that if it's technically correct or if there's more to it.
So
how and why, and apparently we're going to talk a full episode about it. It's happening.
I think it's fantastic. And I think if you're a writer, sometimes you just do what you do and you don't even realize you're doing it with specific words. And then when you actually think about it, you're like, oh my God, I've been doing that all along. And it's just this shock. So words are
I think you
amazing.
Develop new habits as you develop as a writer.
Completely agree.
So I can, at different stages of my writing, I'll have like a sentence structure that I am in love with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll see it all over in drafts that were written during that time. I'm like, oh yeah, I just love that sucker. Now I'm like, can you please mix it up a little bit?
Why?
From the past,
Why do we keep using this?
It's just too much.
Yes, I hear you.
But we evolve and we learn, and studying things like this is part of how we evolve and learn.
Gosh, is it ever. Word choice is just so interesting to me, and I didn't really realize it until I had an editor that like pointed it out to me of some of the things that I was using, and then us talking about everything of making things interesting and jumping out of the common sentence. And it's just been fascinating to me. I'm like, oh, now I'm like, I was obsessed with words before. Now I'm like super obsessed with words.
So we had talked about this, and we had talked about breaking this topic up into 2 different ways of word choice. And one was word choice for a particular character voice or genre, and one was word choice to improve your prose. And we had kind of talked about doing the character voice first. But actually, I kind of want to swap us around and throw you off and hit better prose first.
Why not?
I want to know what it is your editor said. What is the advice that helped you see things differently?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I not only got it from the editor, but I got it from an agent as well. And it was, usage of verbs. I mean, and that for me was like a big, giant, like, I had no idea where it was, if you're using is, am, are, was, be, can, oh my gosh, should, could, all of these words that you're using constantly, where as you use that in common language, when you're talking with somebody, if you see it over and over again, if you are doing like a repeat check, or if you're doing a word, just go word search your manuscript and look up could. Honestly, go do it. And it's like, if you have like hundreds of them, hi, I'm just raising my hand now. I did. And can, and like all of these things, it was like, oh, I'm not using the words that I need to be using as much. I need to make this stronger because this is weak words. This is, us being like, okay, this is common conversation type things. It can be better.
So I've had this thing lately. I've had like an epiphany lately about verbs. And for so long when I'm looking at like how to have better flow in my prose and how to have, because I think the first like beginner thing is all of your sentences should have a different word count in them, right? So when I was first trying to do prose,
Sure.
I was like, oh, if they're all the same word count in every single sentence, then it reads monotone. Well, it's not just word count, it's sentence structure. So if it's the same structure, despite the word count in it, it's still going to read monotone. It's still going to make your reader like zone out.
Yeah.
And so I'm like constantly like trying to play with my sentence structures. And I had this moment where I was going through and editing, and it's like the bazillionth sentence where I'm like fixing it, trying to make it better and playing around with it. And I realized for like the 15th time in a row, it's not the sentence structure, it's not the number of words in the sentence, it's the verb. And I kept finding that I would have an adjective. I don't even know how to explain it. I have this word that's trying to describe the noun. So I'm using like should, could, was, but I have this really cool potential noun, or it's an adjective, but it could be turned into a verb. So adjectives that are describing nouns often can become verbs in my experience. And maybe that's complete lies. All of you like people are
I agree with you on
kill
that.
Me.
Right.
And so I'm finding lately in my editing, I have to look at my sentence and pull out that adjective and turn it into the verb. And all of a sudden I like lose half the sentence.
Yeah.
And it gets to the point and is so much crystal clear. And all of a sudden that verb is also bringing in one of the 5 senses and doing something where you can see and feel something in the sentence. Because let's face it, all of these basic verbs, there's so many elementary verbs that give you no visuals. They give you no sense, no sounds, they're just there to function to make the sentence correct.
Yeah. They're fluff. They're
To
filler.
get an action beat.
Yeah.
Instead of like show an action beat as a storyteller.
Yes.
And so that's been a big one for me with, I don't know if that's even allowed, but I would like to vote that we start a movement where we turn our adjectives into verbs.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
Your sentences become so much stronger when if you're looking at something and you're reading it and you're reading the common language, if you will. I mean, there are things that we do where in common conversation, it's totally acceptable. But when you're reading something and you're just reading the same thing over and over again, it becomes completely monotone. She was running down the path. Okay, great. Good for her. She was running down the path. That's great. You get to the point, you understand the action, but like create that into something more. And this is where you get into like your second and third edits where you're looking at it and you're like, okay, I literally just zoned out on my own work. That is a problem. I need to like jump in and actually look and read it out loud and understand that this needs to be more complex and this needs to show a hell of a lot more than just she was running down the path. So was can completely go. I mean, that is something that people see and they just blank it out and it becomes monotone, common words. It's not that you can't use was. Of course you can. You're going to use was through your work. But if you're using it over and over and over and over again, along with all these other verbs, it just becomes this like bleh, piece of work.
I like to look at it. So run. So she's running, obviously.
Yeah.
And so I can say she's running, or what are the effects of her running? What's happening because of the running? What is the sound of the shoes on the path? What is the sound around her? What is the feel of the clothes on her? What is happening because of the running?
Yep.
And using that as your verbs and your descriptions.
Yes.
It like levels up putting the reader there and seeing it instead of just zoning out about Jane and her dog Spot running
the path. What path are we talking about? What is under her feet? What is around her? What is she smelling?
She's in a white room on a treadmill, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sense. Each footfall is a speeding rhythm, following the dirt path. It's far stronger than just she was running. Pick your words.
Pick your verbs.
Pick your verbs and pick them deliberately. Like, look through them and see how it feels and your tone and who this person is and going through it to kind of figure out, how does this world work? What can I show with one sentence that I wasn't before. When you're first drafting, you're just tossing shit out. You're like, yeah, she was running down a path. And it's like,
I agree.
But then later on, you realize that, like, why, how, what is going on? Throw me into this scene. Take the person who is reading your work and literally toss them into this situation where they feel like they are Jane. You know, you want them to feel who this person is and what this means to them and how they are smelling everything around them, and completely immerse them into your work. And those are the fun things when you think about what you read and what you enjoy reading. It's because you literally stepped out of your world and into another. And you can't do that with a ton of verbs that don't mean a whole lot. You're going to have verbs. Obviously, don't get rid of all of them because that would just be really strange. But you can cut down on them.
I don't think that's possible.
I don't think it's possible either. Like, oh my God, I can never have a was. I can never have a was in my writing. No, that's not true. Like, have a was. It's
not
fine.
at all.
But don't have a was, 4 times in a paragraph. It's like anything that's repetitive. It's just it just weakens your work. So keep going with these strong things to make your work far, far better.
Another thing that is super huge, and I know there's a lot of authors who really feel like having a lot of words makes the work more dignified. And I've found that stripping out as much as you can from something gets to the heart of what you're really trying to say.
Yeah.
So it's actually a great exercise. I'll do it sometimes in editing where there's this chapter where something happens, but kind of how it happens and what else is going on is kind of fuzzy and confusing. So, like, I just strip everything out. And I mean, strip it out, guys. Poppy and I are editing together. I am not afraid of the delete button.
I'm terrified of it. It's scared the crap out of me.
Oh, yeah. Don't worry. I'm working on her. She's deleting stuff. But
it's hard.
I'm not afraid to go in and just, like, delete stuff out and see what my base is. And I think sometimes we get so sentimentally attached to a particular sentence or a way that we said something that we're missing the bigger picture of how it all fits together. If you can't delete stuff, that's fine. Like, make a different draft that's has any deleted words. So this is your copy draft. Go through and delete everything that's not essential and then build back up on top of the core.
Yeah.
And you can do that in your sentences, your paragraphs, your scenes. And it's like you start by cutting all fluff words.
Oh my gosh.
All excess words that aren't needed, all tangents that never circle back around or become applicable in the
Get rid of
scene.
them. You don't need them.
Cut them out.
It's hard. I promise, though, that it will be so much better for you. You have elephants in your room.
I have elephants above me, guys.
Quite all right. It happens.
By elephants, I mean my family.
And they are saying hello to you all by stomping their elephant feet all over the place. Oh, there they go again.
Yep. You're welcome.
Adorable.
I have kids.
Yes, in that, life. Welcome to life. Yeah, it's like it is scary to delete. And it's scary to write something and you're like, oh, this concept is so good. Why is it good? Make it better. I know that we've talked about this previously a whole lot in our first season of, like, this is not a process where you can just barf out a first draft and that's your book. Like, you need to pause and look at it and be like, you're going to find yourself when you start editing. You're going to find yourself when you start finding an appreciation for editing, which I didn't have until the last couple of years. I was like, I hate editing. It's stupid. I hate it. I just don't want to do it anymore. And now I'm like, but I made this sentence so pretty because I used this word. And it's, it's become I've really enjoyed it now in the past year, and I never thought that was something that would happen with me. But I'm also a relatively new writer, so I don't know if it depends on how long you've been writing and how much you enjoy certain things of it. But I've really enjoyed the editing process recently. It's because it's made everything so lovely.
I think there's a finishing high, and so there's a high when you finish a first draft.
Yes.
There's also a high when you level up that draft and finish the next round of editing. I promise it's still there. True. Like, you don't have to just toss it out into, like,
it's one step
published
closer.
World or querying or whatever you're going to do with it. Take a step back. If you're super excited to share it with beta readers.
Yes.
Let it sit. Please let it sit for like a month. And then there's another high that comes from you're first probably going to cringe a little bit when you read it and you get the notes and some of them are going to hurt and it's kind of a bummer. But then when you get through and you edit like a full manuscript, that high is back, guys. It's there, I swear.
Because it's so much better. And you can start seeing the progress that you've made and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like becoming a thing. This isn't like this, yay, I did something anymore. This is like oh my God, this could like come to fruition and this could be really, really amazing. And so you start editing and each round it makes it 1,000 times better. And you're like, oh, I wrote this and it's awesome. And I can't stop reading it. And this is so beautiful. And because I really sat and I looked at this sentence and I thought about it for a long time. And I was like, that was the perfect word choice. And people start highlighting your work and saying, I can't believe you wrote this. Like one sentence, this was so beautiful. Because you compiled and you looked at it and you went through and you really dove in and decided that this needed to be this simplified, fantastic thing. Some of the most powerful sentences are not long. They're not repetitive. They're not common. They're these things that stick out so hard because you really sat and you really thought about them and considered your word choice and what that meant to not only you, but your reader and your character. And you immersed someone into what you were doing.
Sorry, guys. My family's going crazy upstairs.
That's all good. Dance party!
And I think that's part of it, though. And I just want to... It's the same thing we were saying before, where it's not only use short sentences. Never use a verb. Never use should. Never use could. We're not giving you any nevers.
Yeah.
We're telling you places to look at, to go in and tweak, and make sure you're using it sparingly.
Yeah.
So you can have long sentences. You have medium sentences. You have short sentences. Pick that depending on what words you need to... Like, take that moment that you're writing, put it in a little bubble.
Yes.
What makes that little bubble the strongest? And it all starts with your word choice.
I agree. It does. Because you can say so much with really meaningful words, nouns or verbs. There's so much more that you can add. Oh, let's talk about nouns. Have we talked about nouns yet? Now that we've been like on verb land.
Let's do it. Bring in the nouns.
With your noun, you don't typically want to use a common noun. You know, you end up and you're like, oh, they looked out the window and they saw a tree. Okay, cool. It's a tree. Awesome. But like, you can take that tree and you can create it as like this willow that is like the vines of the willow are doing amazing things in the wind. And it's like, there's so many more things that you can add in. That was clearly not a sentence that I had thought about. I literally just pulled it out of my butt. But like, you think about it and you look at something and you can visualize something so much more when you are more specific. So making sure that you're using specific nouns instead of just a car, a plant, a building.
I've actually found with nouns, the biggest thing I have to catch myself with is that's what I have repetitive problems with the most. So, like, I have Pro Writer Aid, and it will catch, in a chapter what the most common, or if you do, like, your whole document, your most used words, and you're like, oh, I use Spock way too much. It's like my most used word.
You would.
P.S. I want to read that. But secondly... That's not actually helping you because I found personally in a scene, it's my nouns that repeated. So although I might be saying door over and over in this one scene, I don't overall in the chapter or in the manuscript. So it's not flagged by a lot of these softwares that you can actually in Pro Writer Aid, if you go down in the nitty gritty, it will actually highlight some of this stuff for you, which is awesome. It takes time. Yes. It's worth it. But it's my nouns that are super repetitive within my scenes. I found that's a problem I struggle with.
I have gone into reader rage when there are too many nouns, when it's like desk or door. She went and she sat on the desk, and the desk was brown, and the desk was hard. And I'm like, I don't give a crap about the desk anymore. I want to throw your book against the wall. It's like...
And I think sometimes, too, when there's too many nouns, you also might be looking at an overblocking issue.
Yes, I agree with you.
Sometimes we feel like we have to say every single movement the character is doing. Yeah. And I couldn't be
notorious for that.
Bored in my mind for anyone in the world getting a play-by-play of every move they do. I just don't need it. Tell me the important moves that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so if you have a repetitive door, you're probably overblocking. You can probably make some assumptions, well, obviously they went through the door if they're now walking in the hallway. So you don't have to classify that they went through the doorway. It's walking through the hallway to get downstairs. Keep it moving forward. Move them past the door. Move them into, describe just something they're seeing in the next room as they're continuing walking.
Yeah.
Your overblocking is something I struggle with. Sometimes I underblock too. It's always picky.
Yeah, it is that balance thing that we've talked about. You need readers, and if somebody doesn't understand what's happening, it means that you need to add a little more blocking. Or if somebody's like, okay, I just skimmed this section, it means that you probably have too much. So you just need to figure out, how that works for people when they're reading it.
And it's a good way to look at your pacing too. I think your nouns are a good gauge.
Yeah.
For repetitive nouns, you probably have clogged pacing right there.
I could see that. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
So we know we want to look at verbs. We want to make sure we don't have repetitive nouns. We want to make sure we have unique nouns. We want to make sure we're cutting fluff words and we're not afraid to delete. We want to make sure that every piece of advice that we're giving is not a ultimatum, never do this.
Oh, gotcha.
It's a, hey, do it sparingly. Of course you're going to do this. Do it sparingly.
Yeah. Think about what your words are.
Now's the really, really fun part. And we're going to talk about word choice for characters. At least that's the fun part for me.
It is fun because you really have to think, this is something that I didn't realize until, a year or two ago, where it's like, oh my God, my characters have different voices and they use different terminology for different things. And this is very important because there's things that are important to them because they're people, and there's things that are not important to them because they're
totally
people.
Real in my head. Thank you very much.
And everybody has a different personality. Everybody hates certain things. Everybody, when you talk to people, there are weird, quirky traits. We've talked about this in character voice. We've talked about this a lot in our antagonists and villains and all of these episodes that we've done before. But you need to associate your words with your characters.
Okay, so I have actually a really fun example that's totally inappropriate because it's me.
Oh,
yeah.
Great.
So I have a character, and this is obviously the book I am writing with Poppy because there's a sex scene in it. So obviously I'm writing this with Poppy. There's a sex scene in it, and I have a character who's super, super sweet, doesn't swear. And I sat there for a half hour staring at the screen what does she say for the word dick? She doesn't say cock. She doesn't say, what does she say? And so sometimes it's, okay, so maybe dick isn't a common word. Maybe penis isn't a common word, but that's what I've chosen to use. It depends
if you're romance or not, or what stands out.
Particular conversation. What word she uses to describe this. Yeah. How does she say penis? So then we had a friend, writer friend in our group, actually Emmy, our first interview that you guys know. Emmy was like, well, how would she say vagina? And I'm like, Mother Lord, I don't know. You romance writers are corrupting me. I have no idea.
Welcome to romance, Cass.
I don't know. She says her sugared lady bits, okay? That's what she says.
Which totally makes sense for your character.
And so we don't have to be talking about vaginas and penises. We can be talking about a tea kettle. We can be talking about a type of furniture. So if your character would know, the actual, if it's, antique furniture and they know the actual verbiage of what that type of antique is, it better be right there because they have a history of it.
And that's the thing. It's what is important to them.
Yeah.
If their thing is antique furniture, they are going to notice every piece of antique furniture they come across.
If you're just trying to use big fancy words as an author to look cool,
nobody's going to care. Your character doesn't care. Why would your reader care if your character doesn't care? There are so many things that people get incredibly passionate about. Cass and I get incredibly passionate about writing. So if somebody brings up anything about writing, we're going to be like, oh, I am in this to win it. Okay? And we're going to start talking
3 hours? Because that's how long this conversation is going.
It's gonna hit. And so if your character, what does everything mean to them? What are their passions? What do they mean the most about? Because those are the things they're going to notice. Those are the words they're going to use. Those are the things they're going to know the most about. And that's really fun with word choice because you start being like, okay, I know nothing about mechanics, but my character is a mechanic. So what do I need to do? Well, obviously you need to go research some words on mechanics, and because your character's going to use them. You might not as an author, but your character is. And so you're going to have to find those word choices that mean something to them, where they're talking in mechanical metaphors and they're talking in mechanical pieces, and oh, this is how an engine works, and they're going to be thinking of these terms and words that you might not as an author, and your reader might not as a reader, but you're going to be able to use it within context because that means something so much to your
and that's
character.
when you start getting the character voice that doesn't need the dialogue tags on it.
Absolutely.
Because it's so distinct, and oh, I know who that is. I don't need a dialogue tag. I know exactly who's talking right now.
Yes.
And it's awesome to have, I shouldn't even say awesome. It's essential to have that for your protagonists. And it's awesome to have it for all your side characters as well, too, especially if they're like heavy hitters and they're in a good chunk of your book.
Yeah.
You want them to have their unique verbiage, which means you need to sit down and think about what that is. I mean, I know we've talked before about metaphors and we've talked about unique swears, but it is common nouns. How do they say it? I mean, if you look at little things, too, there's so many things. Poppy and I will talk all the time about being East Coast and West Coast.
Yeah.
And she's got all this big Italian family, and they say things entirely different than I do.
Oh, Mary, my husband, was like, we need a dictionary between North and South because just silly things. Do you put it away or do you put it up? I used to put things up. He would laugh at me because you don't put things up. It's up in the air. Why would you put things up? You put them away. And I'm like, I never thought of that before. That is fascinating. There's different ways that you say things.
Lots of different things, too, like soda or pop.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on where you're from. And if you really wanted to get into awesome fantasy world building, if you're like, oh, I don't have a modern day world setting, so I need to do that. Do you have like a developed world where you have different societies who have little differences like this? I had so much fun adding in like a 2-line dialogue into a chapter the other day where I have a clericon completely complaining about gnomes.
Oh, it's fantastic.
So it's 2 sentences. It doesn't really, but obviously they're made up. But like it's a fantasy world. Yeah. But it's like these are 2 different groups, and they have this little clash and difference between them. And it's world building. The story's not about it. I don't go into a big info dump explaining where it started from or why. It's like 2 lines, and you move on. And hopefully the reader's like, haha, cute. Okay, so those 2 groups don't get along. Got it. Going along, and that's all they need to do right then and there.
That is an amazing world building thing when you use specific words and the ways that people say things. Yeah.
Yeah, and then noticing that there's details in different types of people, and there's likes and dislikes and collisions, and your word choice can highlight that.
Yes.
How people communicate, the words they choose, can really fill in your world, actually, which is kind of cool.
It is so cool, and I didn't realize certain things until I had like critiquers coming back and being like, this is the best line I've ever heard for world building. And I would reread it and I'd be like, it was? And I'd be like, oh, I guess that does show a whole lot about the world in like a very single sentence. It doesn't take a lot. You don't need to do this exposition about like, this is how the world is, people. You just need to show it. And in order to do that, you have to show some of these words and pick what you have. What is your tone? You know, what is this world like? Is it fantasy? Do you have your own words that they've created? Man, it's just, words are so incredible and they mean so much. And there's so many things that you can do with them with specific word choices. So think about what you are writing on your second and third draft. Don't do it in your first, man. Just blaze it out. Just barf it all out and then go back and look at it again and be like, okay, how can I make this way stronger? How can I tighten this up? If you're repetitive, I'm a repetitive talker. I will say things like 3 ways and I have to stop myself sometimes because I'll be like, oh, I've already explained that one time, but I said it a different way so that making sure that everybody got it, right? And
I do that when I don't feel heard.
Right? When you don't feel heard. But when you're writing a book, you don't know if that person's listening to you or not. Like, just say it one time. You don't need to keep harping on it on this one specific thing. Or make
it like this tiny little cupcake and lay it 3 different times in 3 different areas. That's tiny, though. You don't get a full paragraph for this stuff, guys.
Exactly. You don't need to just say it in like 3 different sentences that are all meaning the exact same thing. Because like it's frustrating for a reader because you're like, okay, I freaking got it. Oh my God. And
if they don't bring it up in a different way as a reminder and saying it in a different way later on, again, a little snippet, these one little lines here and there mean something. And if the story's good, you'd be surprised how much the reader retains those little lines. I swear, guys. They really do.
Yeah.
I also wanted to talk about something else that happened that I thought was really interesting. So apparently I'm just going to be talking about Poppy and I writing together tonight.
Fabulous. So, we've been doing that a lot lately, so it makes sense.
We've been we're rewriting the ending to our novel right now. We've gone through all the rest and we're editing the ending and revamping it. And I think it's really important. I wanted to talk about that because I want to talk about knowing your genre that you're writing for. And I know that's super scary.
Huge
like,
one.
Oh
yes.
no, I don't know my genre. I'm just going to throw this little hint out here to you right now. If you don't know your genre, take a microscope to your protagonist. The age of your protagonist, how they speak, the type of words they use, vocabulary depth, if they're actually debating over the type of milk they're going to drink or who they're going to kill that day, like actually signifies different genres as well. So like whatever is happening with them, if you're unsure of your genre, really look into your protagonist. So obviously Poppy's based in romance. I'm not like I'm a huge reader of romance, so I'm not completely unskilled in it.
Yeah.
But my bread and butter is horror and fantasy. And so working on like the romance arc, which don't worry, she has to work on the horror arc with me in our book too. But we're working on it, and like I'm using a metaphor, and I'm talking about he says something that I say picks a scab, an old scab of hers.
Yep.
And Poppy's like, you cannot say that in romance. And our book is fantasy romance, we've decided.
Yes.
And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, it's not an actual scab she's picking. She's talking about like a mental wound. And I think it's silly, but that's probably a thing in romance. And I would have never known because I'm not familiar with writing it. And so if you're not familiar with writing a particular genre, get beta readers. And even if their advice seems silly and the scab seems perfectly fine to you, just get rid of it. Just put something else in.
If it gives you, it depends on your genre. Again, it does depend on your, if you're horror, you're going to want to pick scabs all over the place. If you're in romance and it gives you a cringe factor, you don't want that. You do not want to cringe. You don't want your readers cringing when you're in romance.
Well, I mean, don't get me wrong. You're going to cringe in a book where I'm the author. But she doesn't want you to cringe when the romantic couple is supposed to be getting closer.
That's the thing right there. That's true. It is all about the timing because like when you're doing the horror elements and stuff, yes, of course you want to cringe. You want them to be scared. You want the element of terror and gross and like you want to be like, ugh. But then when they're like all getting close, you don't want to think about scabs. Dude, that's nasty.
But I'm like, it just fits. It's like a scab he's picking at, a mental scab of hers. And nope, I don't get to use that, guys, because that does not work for the demographic. And I'm okay with that. It's such an easy tweak.
Oh, I made cringe face. I made cringe face. We cannot have cringe face during the sexy time. I'm sorry. So you do have to think about your genre and you think about your timing on your pieces when you deliver some of these things. If you're in the middle of like a terrible, terrifying moment, you can't be like, it's sunshine and sparkles because like that doesn't make any sense. So you want it to be like horrible and terrifying and you want those words to be like, these are scary words and they are making the tone really terrifying. You know, you don't want it to be like, these are so cute.
That's a great example, Poppy.
You don't want it to be, thank you. I was very specific with my nouns. So you're welcome. So welcome.
Wow. That was awesome.
Yes. So you wanted to make sure that depending on what you're writing and that it does mesh with the genre that you're in, that is super duper important because you don't want to make your readers cringe because they're not used to something like that. If they are avid genre readers of what you're writing, you want to make sure that you know what you're writing.
And I think it's really huge. So you mentioned tone. I think tone is big. And you have to understand, like, what the tone of your book is as a whole. And so even if the book is, as a whole, a horror spoof, so as a whole, it's going to be more comedic. It doesn't mean it can't have a serious moment scene bubble in there.
Absolutely.
Or a moment where it's a theme that's actually real comparison to the rest of the spoof stuff. Or it can't have, like, sure, they're going to laugh through things, but real other things can happen in there in your tone. And the verbs that you use and the nouns that you use are going to set your tone.
Yeah.
So be aware of that. Sure, it can be more visceral and grotesque if you're writing horror. It can be more photoshopped and feel good if you're writing romance.
Absolutely.
And it can even be mysterious. One of my favorite things with writing, and it's a quote I'm just barely starting to understand lately, is you shouldn't be answering questions as an author. You should be raising them.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think it is really interesting, and I've heard that advice from a lot, like that's been quoted from a lot of different authors. And it's really made me stop and think. So sometimes you don't have to nail things, like you don't have to nail like exactly what you're saying and hold their hand through it. Sometimes you can just raise the question and let them fill in the answers.
Yep.
And that mystery and question, depending on your genre, can really work too. And a lot of that tone can also be done with the verbs and nouns that you choose. And it's so funny because we talk about verbs and nouns and we all know what they are, but there's a different level when you're writing. It's not just any verb or any noun. And it seems so tedious at first looking at that through every sentence, but it gets easier and faster.
It really does. Once you go through like an edit, it's going to take a long time. My first edit took me a year because I just tore through it.
That's
and I was like, this isn't right. This is like, I just have to keep studying. I have to keep learning. I'm not doing it correctly. I need to keep going. It's not perfect by any stretch, but it's out there. And now that I've done that, it is so much faster. I mean, my first drafts they're fast, they're cleaner. And then you go through and you realize your word choice and you realize what you're really diving into. You set a tone when you're having somebody read your work. You're aiming for an emotion. Because when you're reading, that's what you want. You want somebody immersed, you want somebody in it, you want somebody attached. And when you have all these great emotions in there, it's because of the words that you use.
The words that you leave out, those fluff words really like pad it so the reader kind of loses the emotion, I think, sometimes when there's too many words in it.
If you have too many words and you have too many repetitions and you have stuff, it is very easy to kind of just overlook some things. Or if you say it 3 times in the same way, it's like, okay, yeah, got it. Keep going. It doesn't have the impact. And word using, impact is for me is a fun word to use, because even if your tone is fun and cute and adorable, I'm really big on making like multiple emotions through my book. So like if something is cute and happy and awesome, I also want to crash your mood in certain ways, and I do that with words.
Mean.
I am mean like that.
So mean.
Because I feel like in order to get an emotional response, you have to have a gamut of emotions. You have to have like these hard times. You have to have these sweet and darling times and these funny times. And you have to have these moments where you're just like, oh my God, what is going to happen? And you do that with words. It's not something that is just monotone. It is interesting to read because it invokes an emotion. And that's done with words. It's done with sounds. It's done with senses. It's done because you selected your words correctly.
So when we were talking about words, there was one category we were talking about that I felt like really we couldn't just discuss it when we were talking about how to improve your prose, and we couldn't just discuss it about when it's particular character word choice. It was one that actually it's when you're at an advanced editing stage, and that's the rhythm of the sentence. The rhythm of the words. And I think we've mentioned this before. Our private writing group that we are a part of, we do monthly read-alouds. So we meet up together all on like screen, and we each take turns reading a section of our writing. We'll pick like a different theme, a different topic that we're all showing a piece of our own work that handles that topic, whether it's the darkest hour, endings, character tics, whatever it is. We're like, okay, I'm gonna, this piece I feel like amplifies that moment. And oh my gosh, guys, reading things out loud. We just met with our writer group a few days ago, and I decided I have a new project I'm working on, and so I decided I wanted to use a piece from that. And so it's like complete first draft material.
Yep.
And I go through and I read it out loud, and I'm like, I'm glad that my writing group knows me and loves me, because I'm like swearing at myself and breaking in between me and like, oh, well, here I go repeating again. I'm catching all these repeats. I'm catching all of these stumbles in the prose because I'm reading it out loud.
Right.
So I definitely think when you're looking at rhythm and what words are working, when you read it out loud, you're going to stumble on the word that doesn't work.
I agree with you completely on that. I have really found I'll find myself just talking about it out loud when I'm editing, which I have to be careful of because I have tiny ears around. So I'm like, oh,
and of course you write only G-rated stuff. So.
Oh, obviously. So yeah, I have to be careful sometimes because I will start saying it out loud because it helps so much when you say it out loud. Reading it out loud is like, you wouldn't think because you're just reading it, right? But no, when you actually hear it, it is far different from when you're actually just looking at it with your eyeballs. It is different. So highly, highly recommended on actually chatting it out and trying to figure out a sentence and how the rhythm flies.
And so the reason I'm like, oh, this is like about both, because the rhythm of your sentence and your words obviously is about your prose, right? Picking the right words that fit the rhythm. Yeah. But it's also about your character, because you can't pick a word that your character wouldn't say to fit your rhythm.
Yeah. If you're using like big giant words and your character is 12 years old, why? Why are they using big giant words when they're 12 years old? You have to be careful and use common 12-year-old known words. You can't be using these big massive things.
I have an old manuscript which I have like put in a drawer and locked away, and maybe one day I'll pull it out again. But I had a bunch of beta reads on it, and there's like a section in it where the main character is going through caves that have a bunch of bat poop. There's a particular word for bat poop, and about 90% of my beta readers wanted me to edit. So like, this is the word for bat poop. This is the word for bat poop. And I was like, she doesn't know that. Obviously, I know it because I've had like 15 critiquers tell me it at this point. I know it.
Right. Yeah.
But my character is not like hanging out with bats.
With bats.
She doesn't know, like, she's never been around bat poop. She wouldn't know that's the word for it. And so you have to be careful of that stuff too, looking at the technical word for something combined with your particular character's
knowledge.
Knowledge, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and so that's something too that you have to look at with rhythm. Sure, the word might fit perfectly and sound great, but is it a word that your character would use?
That's super important. I think, yeah, I like that a lot. That is definitely a thing.
It's something that makes editing a lot longer for me. That's when I actually, so I don't know about you guys, but I've heard that it's like a novice writer thing to use a thesaurus. To be like, oh, you're just plugging in fancy big words. Actually, I'm using my thesaurus to look up and find, okay, Jane is running.
The correct word.
What's another way that she would describe running? And I'm actually looking for the list, looking for Jane's voice. Yep. I'm not looking at what's the fanciest, biggest word to make me look the best. I'm like, what? And I'm waiting for my character to like pluck a word for me out of that list and be like, oh, that's how I'd say it. I'd be like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm a novice writer, but I love my thesaurus.
I know. I love my thesaurus as well. I don't use it all the time. And yes, you can do stronger things. But at the same time, it's really helpful sometimes because you're not using running. You're using something else. Or
poor Jane in this jog.
Quickly walked.
She is just getting beat up tonight.
She is just running it all over the place. So fast.
You're stupid running, Jane.
Oh my gosh. Yes, exactly that.
So I guess basically just take time and care with your words. Don't be afraid to cut stuff.
Don't be vague.
Pay attention to rhythm, but don't let it override character voice.
Yeah.
Character voice is a thing. Good prose is author voice.
Yes.
And you need both.
Gosh, you need both. You need both to separate it out, to make everything just all shiny and cool.
It's no big deal,
Fun
right?
to read.
That's like a
we
tiny
got
thing.
this. Keep practicing. It will be fine. We promise.
Gets easier and faster with time, without a doubt.
It does. It really does.
We're wrapping up now our Poppy Time contest.
Oh my goodness.
So make sure that if you haven't done that, go check it out. It's based out of Twitter. You just hashtag Poppy Time. You give us a interview question. Poppy's got her book Holiday Hotel coming out for release that we're super, super pumped up. I love it, guys. It's so good.
It's so fun.
Because I'm her writer soulmate, I've gotten to already read book 2 in the series, which is so good. But it's really, really fantastic. You get a chance to come and join us. You can uncork with us, have a glass, hang out with us, and you get to interview Poppy, and I get to tease her and make fun of her while you interview her. And you get to hang out with us.
It will be great. You're going to love it. It's going to be so much fun.
So go hashtag Poppy Time, give us an interview question, and we will be announcing October 12th, I think, is our deadline, where we're announcing that. So make sure you check that out. And then we've got our Discord running strong. We've got new members coming all the time for that. So that's super fun. So if you want to chat with us about stuff, if you want to sprint with us, if you want to just bomb us with gifts, you'd probably be my best friend. So
we love some gifts.
You can hit our Discord link by going to our website, punchkeys.com. And as always, guys, please give us some reviews. Give us some love.
And keep punching the keys.
Always. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. And if you liked this episode, please subscribe and give us that clickable 5-star love.
Got writer questions or feedback? Reach out through our website. And until next time, make sure to punch the keys.